These films weren't just noisy, they were quietly dangerous. They sold us fireballs and fists, then smuggled in questions about power, loyalty, and the price of oaths. Look close. The blasts happen off-screen, the decisions happen in shadows, and the hero learns the enemy isn't always across the room, sometimes it's inside the system that hired him. In the cuts they rushed, in the scenes they buried, you can still hear the editor's scissors tremble. What if the truth in action cinema was never in the lines but hid between the frames they couldn't control? These are the 5 films that revealed what Hollywood tried to hide. Between 1992 and 1996, action cinema entered a strange twilight. The Cold War had ended, and Hollywood's clean heroes were suddenly without a cause. The studios filled that vacuum with loud explosions and louder slogans, but beneath the smoke, independent directors were whispering doubts. They borrowed the language of the blockbuster bombs, blades, bloodlines, yet used it to confess a loss of faith. These weren't the glossy franchise films that played safe. They were made in the shadows, small budgets, fading stars, and crews who still remembered real wars. Their stories took place in parking lots, back alleys, or corporate towers too empty for comfort. But listen closely. Every shattered window, every misplaced bullet, every code of honor broken in the dark was saying the same thing: the system is cracking, and the heroes no longer believe in what they protect. Let's rewind to the 5 films that crossed the line between entertainment and confession. Film 1: Live Wire, 1992. In the summer of 1992, action cinema met its strangest weapon and its most symbolic one. Live Wire, directed by Christian Duguay, opens with a senator exploding from the inside out. There are no bombs, no wires, no clues, just combustion disguised as coincidence. Pierce Brosnan plays Danny O'Neill, an explosives expert drowning in grief and bureaucracy, hunting a killer who uses science the way politicians use promises, invisibly and without consequence. On the surface, it's a high-concept thriller. What if bodies could detonate like time bombs? A stuntman's dream wrapped in glossy paranoia. But beneath the spectacle, the film burns with moral corrosion. The real explosive isn't chemical, it's institutional. O'Neill's investigations keep circling back to the people who hired him, to the government contracts that profit from chaos, to the quiet understanding that control means having the right to destroy. Brosnan, still years away from becoming James Bond, carries that haunted irony, a man who saves lives for a system that no longer values them. Every detonation feels like an act of policy. Every rescue feels too late. In the end, when O'Neill disables the final bomb, it doesn't feel like victory. It feels like paperwork filed after the truth already blew apart. Film 2: Night Hunter, 1996. By 1996, the heroes had grown quieter and the monsters had learned to wear suits. Night Hunter, directed by Rick Jacobson and led by Don the Dragon Wilson, pretends to be about vampires. But what it's really hunting is something older, colder, and entirely human, the kind of predators who feed not on blood, but on power. Jack Cutter isn't your usual martial arts hero. He isn't avenging a family or defending a nation. He's cleaning up the failures of a secret order that let the infection spread a lineage of hunters turned complacent, their oaths sold for sponsorships and silence. The film's budget was modest, its release quiet, but its tone was merciless. In the fog and flickering neon, you can feel a filmmaker pushing against the comfort of his own genre. The vampires of Night Hunter aren't supernatural, they're metaphors for institutions that drain purpose until conscience collapses. Cutter's battles happen in warehouses and empty streets, filmed like memories of wars we pretended were won. When he finally corners the last vampire, the mask falls. What he's really killing is denial. The horror ends, but the system remains. As the credits roll, Cutter walks into the dawn, not as a savior, but as a man who finally understands the oldest curse of all. Once you see the truth, you can never go back to sleep. Film 3: Back in Action, 1993. When Back in Action arrived in 1993, it looked like another buddy cop brawl, 2 men, 1 mission, too many bullets. But behind the fists and gunfire was something else. A story about the casualties of loyalty. Directed by Steve DeMarco, the film pairs Roddy Piper, the bruised street cop who's lost faith in his badge, with Billy Blanks, an ex-special forces soldier trying to protect his sister from a drug cartel that buys justice wholesale. On paper, it's simple. One fights for the law, the other fights because the law has already failed. Yet every frame sweats with exhaustion. The neon streets of Toronto stand in for a city that doesn't care, and every punch lands like the echo of a promise broken somewhere above them. The marketing sold adrenaline, but what lingers is despair. When Piper's cop snaps, when Blank stops asking permission, the film stops pretending to believe in the system. The explosions feel like punctuation marks at the end of moral sentences. Beneath the noise, Back in Action asks a dangerous question. What happens when justice becomes just another brand? The final shootout doesn't crown heroes, it buries illusions. Two men walk away from the flames, not triumphant but aware that winning means nothing when the fight itself was rigged. Film 4, American Samurai, 1992. In American Samurai, the blade isn't just a weapon, it's a question sharpened over centuries. What does honor cost when it's for sale? Directed by Sam Furstenberg, this 1992 Canon Pictures production stars David Bradley as Drew Collins, an American raised in Japan, trained in the ancient ways of the samurai. His adoptive brother, played by Mark Dacascos, inherits the family sword and the rage that comes with it. When Drew refuses to join a crime syndicate run through underground death tournaments, the brothers become enemies not by choice, but by market demand. To most viewers, it's an East meets West martial arts thriller filled with swords, sweat, and slow-motion duels. But beneath that surface clash lies a quieter tragedy. Tradition mass-produced, honor franchised, culture commodified. The samurai code, once sacred, becomes an export item, packaged for Western consumption. The tournament arena, lit by neon and greed, turns ancestral ritual into televised blood sport. In the final fight, the brothers' blades cross not for glory but for ownership of heritage, of identity, of meaning itself. When the dust settles, there's no applause, no enlightenment, just silence, as if the sword itself refuses to belong to anyone. It's the moment when discipline meets commerce and neither survives intact. Film 5, Red, Scorpion, 1994. By 1994, the Cold War was over, but the battlefield just changed uniforms. Red Scorpion 2, directed by Michael Kennedy, takes what should have been a simple sequel and turns it into a mirror of a world that no longer knows who the enemy is. This time, the villain isn't a Soviet general. It's a domestic militia, a faceless ideology, with American accents and corporate funding. Matt McComb plays Nick Stone, a soldier recruited to infiltrate and dismantle a neo-fascist paramilitary group hiding inside the very soil he's sworn to defend. On the surface, it's patriotic pulp muscle, gunfire, redemption through violence. But in the silence between shots, you hear something uneasy. The war never ended. It just came home. Gone are the desert sands of Africa from the first Red Scorpion, replaced with warehouses and forests that look eerily like Heartland America. The explosions feel smaller, the faces more familiar, the slogans uncomfortably believable. Stone's mission slowly turns into self-recognition. He's been trained by the same system that built his enemies. The film's final line could have been propaganda, but instead it lands like a confession that violence, once unleashed in the name of order, never retires. It just changes its flag. Some films warn us. Others remind us that the warning came too late. Red Scorpion 2 does both. Bonus fact: The Silencer, 1992. Hidden between the headlines and the bargain bins of the early 90 seconds was The Silencer, a film that barely made it to release, yet captured the paranoia of its entire era. Directed by Robert Lee, it starred Lynn Cormack and Chris Mitchum, son of Hollywood legend Robert Mitchum. On paper, it was just another espionage thriller. A government assassin framed, a deep state cover-up, a secret no one survives knowing. But watch closely, and you'll see why this film vanished so fast. The story cuts too close to reality. It portrays a covert agency manipulating both sides of the Cold War, manufacturing enemies to justify its existence. It isn't just about violence. It's about bureaucracy, weaponized a world where morality is edited out for operational efficiency. Every scene feels like evidence that shouldn't have been filmed. Even the title, The Silencer, sounds like a metaphor for censorship, for the voices cut out of the reel before the audience ever arrived. The film's marketing was minimal, its distribution brief. By the time it reached home video, it was already forgotten, a whisper in a decade shouting for attention. Some films fail on screen, others were never even allowed to fail. Taken together, these 5 films form a confession disguised as entertainment. Livewire showed how the system burns from the inside. Night Hunter warned that the predators of power wear human faces. Back in Action revealed the exhaustion of justice itself. American Samurai exposed the sale of tradition. And Red Scorpion, too, admitted that the war never really left us, it simply changed its uniform. They weren't meant to last. Shot fast, sold cheap, and forgotten quickly, yet their truths aged better than their effects. Beneath the action tropes, they carried something Hollywood rarely dares to keep: moral fatigue. Each film, in its own way, asked what happens when violence becomes a reflex instead of a warning, when honor becomes marketing, and when the hero's silence speaks louder than the explosions. As the reels fade and the credits roll, one thought remains: maybe the truth of an era is never in its biggest films, but in the ones too honest to survive. Because in cinema, as in history, the difference between real and real is just one letter. But sometimes, that's all it takes to bury the truth. If these stories stirred something in you, that uneasy mix of nostalgia and suspicion, it's because they were never just action movies. They were warnings disguised as entertainment, messages hidden in the smoke. Each frame carried a quiet rebellion, a reminder that truth doesn't vanish, it just waits for someone willing to look past the spectacle. So before you scroll to the next explosion, ask yourself, what else did they edit out? What other truths are still buried in the reels gathering dust? Like, share, and tell us which forgotten film deserves to be seen again and why. Real Secrets, where the truth was always in the edit.